This is an excerpt from The Meadow, an unpublished book by Brian Schrauger, copyright 2013. Chapter 1, The Howls. Perhaps 10 hours had gone by since Taylor died. I was, at last, ready to collapse, certain that I would plop down, instantly escaping into sleep. But I could not plop. Instead, I sat in underwear on the edge of the bed, paralyzed. That is when the howls attacked. "Oh, how much I love you. Oh, how well you loved me. Oh, why, God, why was there so much pain? And why, God, why did you do it to a boy? Why not me? Why? Oh!" I do not remember lying down. I do not remember when I fell asleep, and until I wrote these words, I did not remember meeting Job or the meadow where he was, the place where I woke up on the other side of sleep. Chapter 2, On the Other Side of Sleep. I found myself in the center of a field surrounded by a forest near the base of snow-capped mountains. An angry-sounding stream roared somewhere just beyond the meadow's edge. The carpet of green grasses on which I stood was soft. A rising wind rustled through the leaves and limbs of majestic trees as from the east a thunderhead approached. It was a massive heap of clouds, a black Mount Everest in the sky. Inside its cumulus dark bulk was a cacophony of lightning flashing hotter than the sun. Superheated air from countless lightning bolts exploded in what seemed to be a single pulsing wave of sound, undulating thunderclaps that shook me to the bone. I thought the supercell approaching and descending from above would blow me away. I hoped it would. My howls were undiminished in this place, if anything. My soulish pain, and from it the howls grew in volume and in wordless eloquence. Too weak to stand, I had fallen to my knees. When I howled, my torso was upright, face lifted like a wolf wailing at the moon. But in this place there was no moon, only looming licorice clouds in which I hoped to die. When the pain was just too much, I doubled over, head down to the ground, like a kneeling fetus propped up in this grassy womb by bent and shaking arms. Like a Muslim at his prayers, up and down I went. However, in careless violation of what Muhammad taught, my intent was anything but submission to his deity. Up and down, with howls and shaking fists, I protested the injustice of my son's suffering, shouted out my pride at his heroism, screamed the pain from my loss, a pain too deep for words. The black but strobe-like blinding clouds settled over me. I was in the middle of the storm. Sweet death, I hoped, I prayed, was at hand, a gift of mindless nothingness, deliverance from agony. But death was not to be, not yet. Instead, the cloud, as if it was alive, made music with my howls. Time stood still. The thundercloud and I composed, performed forever and a day. When I bellowed out in pride at my son's courageous fight, the cloud lit up with fireworks of at least 10 million watts. When I protested the injustice of his suffering, the thunder raged with me. When I screamed with pain from separation, loss, howling, swirling winds inside the clouds screamed too. In point and counterpoint, in rhythmic light and sounds, the cloud and I improvised a requiem more beautiful and troubling than Mozart's tortured genius. When our crescendo was complete, I could no longer howl but only sob. Ululating thunder slowly rippled out on every side, retreating waves from the splash of my now sinking stone of grief. Lightning flashes, too, began to move away. As they did, their color turned from blinding white into a different hue. Perhaps that's why the rain that fell from the thunderhead, drenching me from head to toe, bled red. In its massage I collapsed, and in this place, inside my sleep, I slept. A hand shook my shoulder. "Hey, Dad, me mad, fi fi fad." It was a playful voice I love and know so well. Injected with a rush of adrenaline, I was instantly awake. Jumping to my feet, I cried, "Taylor! Taylor?" But he was nowhere to be seen. It was the first of countless moments that I would come to know too well, when cruel memory crushed all joy. My blonde-haired son with mischievous eyes full of laughter, love, and wit, the unexpected soulmate of my life, had died. In the days of drunken grief, I let my ears be eyes. They led me, staggering, toward the meadow's edge, where I still heard a roaring mountain stream. It was just beyond the edge of the largest of the giant trees that stood around the oval-shaped and open field. Just inside the shadow of a cathedral canopy of leaves was Titanic's Rock. It stuck up from the ground like the berg that sunk the famous ship for which I named this stony thing. The portion of the rock that faced the open grass was an odd-shaped V. At the apex of the V, and on either side, were 3 sitting spots, irregular, smooth hollows worn by nature's hand. Brushing off light detritus of fallen leaves and twigs, I plopped my skinny butt into the nearest shallow bowl on one side of the V. It was a perfect fit, but I was not impressed with it or anything around me. Instead, I sat with elbows on both knees, face buried in my hands. There were sobs and tears, but no howls. They were hibernating. In the place where they had been, I felt nauseated. I wanted to throw up, but could not. Even though my body was in disgustingly good shape, my weakened heart and wounded soul paralyzed my will. I could not move. Not that I wanted to, I really did not care. Once again, in the meadow, as it also is on this side of sleep, time's normal beat broke down. My inner clock made passing things irregular and odd. It sometimes seemed I was removed from cause-effect, from hours, days, and minutes, even months and years. Sometimes seconds were millennia. Other times, eternal things flashed by faster than the speed of light. "Brian, Brian, Brian!" The baritone was beautiful, but when I looked, I saw a man so ugly he made the Phantom of the Opera look like George Clooney. The man who called my name had a hairless head like mine, but from his shiny dome to his hairy feet, he was ravaged with pockmarks. He had more craters than the moon. Any time before that day, I would have yelled and run away. On this day, though, I was unfazed. I looked the opera's Phantom in the eye and said, "Why are you here?" I knew who he was. "I don't want to see you," I said. "I want to see my son. Why isn't Taylor here?" The ageless and ugly man looked at me with dancing eyes. I recognized the gaze. It was like the one I knew so well, humorous and stubborn, passionate with righteous rage and with heaven's joy. It was the gleam I'd seen and loved in my son's face from the day that he was born until the day he died. Today. "What makes you think he isn't here?" Job asked. "Of course he is, and jumping on 2 legs like a kangaroo. If it was possible, I think the boy would wet himself. He's here, you're here. He can see you, but you cannot see him. You're not allowed, because the joy would ruin you, and you still have work to do." Ruin me? I scoffed. How in God's name could I be more ruined than I am? You think you're worse off than I was? Job barked. Although it wasn't much, Job's flash of anger frightened me, then angered me as well. With his verbal slap, he had snapped my heart awake, giving it a brief reprieve from grief. So, anger's still part of your repertoire, I said. Of course. And this is your first and perhaps most important lesson, Job replied. The truth about the truth is that it's never words alone. Seeing the confusion in my eyes, Job clarified, the truth is more than words. Taylor died today. Wouldn't you agree? His question ended my reprieve as sorrow re-engulfed me. I began to shake. With shining eyes, this ugly man bent to his knees and hugged me in his arms. There I fell apart, sobbing like a preteen boy in his daddy's arms. Job's touch unleashed a weeping flood as I felt him crying too, his drops of tears splashing on my freshly shaven and hairless head. When tears were done, Job stepped back and took the seat across from me on the other side of the V-shaped sitting place, worn out from the rock. Do you understand what I just said? He asked. I shrugged my shoulders in response, not knowing what he meant. The truth about the truth, he explained, is that it's always more than formulas or facts. The whole truth, and nothing but the truth about the truth, is that it has 3 parts. It is always personal, always passionate, and always propositional. When he saw I did not understand, Job prodded me again. Taylor died today. The most important things about this truth is that it's personal and passionate. If you did not weep, if you felt no pain from giving birth to grief, if you were not angered by your own son's suffering, something would be very, very wrong. If you regarded Taylor's death as a fact and nothing but a fact, that would be an obscene lie. He paused. Job's posture and expression told me he was looking for a thought before he spoke again. When he did, he looked at me with piercing eyes and said, if an amputee was told by everyone around him, including his physicians, that his bouts with pain, especially phantom pain, were not real, would that be the truth? Hell no, I angrily replied. Throughout his 2-year battle, Taylor's greatest suffering was exactly this, tortuous phantom pains from his invisible, amputated hip and leg. It is a kind of pain most doctors do not understand, and one dismissed, even dissed to me as just in your son's mind, even while he listened to Taylor's agonizing screams. Exactly, Job responded. Hell no, exactly. Remember that answer. And remember this. Taylor died today is not the only truth you must embrace. Here is another one. Today you too became an amputee. I nodded carelessly and said, You're right. Thank God our family has so much support from thousands who have known and loved my son, people who have walked with us every single day of Taylor's 2-year war. Although our hearts are torn apart, at least we have a lot of friends on which to lean as we hobble down the days ahead. A whole lot more than your few 3, I teased, and none of them so bad. Job smiled in response, although his eyes looked sad. Go now, he said, standing up. You have a funeral to prepare, a family to comfort, a message to give, a pilgrimage to begin. Remember, though, You are an amputee, crippled for the rest of life on your side of the grave. For several days and maybe weeks, you will think that you are better than you really are. That's because your heart and soul have something like an epidural drip. Through it, medicines of shock and special grace are blocking almost all your pain. You know about epidurals? I laughed. Oh yes, he said, and much more. Now go and do what must be done. And while you're doing it, he added, why don't you read my book? I had already many times. It had never been much fun. Reading it again seemed the last thing that I needed at the time. But knowing how sensitive and insecure authors are, I lied and said, okay. Will I see you again? I asked. Ambling away, Job turned his ugly head and said, I'm afraid you will. And by the way, he added, someday you really must articulate that howl. You heard that? I asked, surprised. But before he could answer, I woke up in my bed. The sun had long since set, and the room was dark. But I was oddly calm. The howls were nowhere to be seen, and my wounded spirit felt a lift. How strange, I thought. I did not have a single conscious memory of the meadow and what had happened there.